Hello, I suggest you crochet a simple pattern in a continuous way of knitting. The pattern consists of small square motifs. And all these square motifs are connected by one single thread without tearing this thread. This is how the front side of the pattern looks like. This is how the wrong side of this pattern looks like. It fits easily, simply, and very quickly. The pattern is universal, suitable for different types of products. I knitted this pattern from thin cotton. In 50 grams, I have 280 meters and a thin 0.75 mm knitting hook. We perform the first loop and tie a chain of 10 air loops. The first loop, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth and 10th air loop. Now we close the resulting chain with a ring. We have a semicircle. Insert the hook into the very first air loop and stretch the working loop through the first loop. At the same time, the tail is conveniently bent and remains in the middle of the next row. Next, we perform 4 air loops, 2 capes on the hook. In a ring we will tie 4 columns with 2 capes. The first column with 2 capes, the second column with 2 capes, the third column with 2 capes and the fourth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 8 air loops, 2 capes on a hook. In a ring we tie 5 columns with 2 capes, the first column, the second column, the third, the fourth column with 2 capes and the fifth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 8 air loops, 2 capes on the hook, and once again we will tie a group of columns from columns with 2 capes, 5 columns. The first, second, third, fourth and fifth column with 2 capes from this place will perform the transition to the next square motif. To do this, we will tie a chain of 22 air loops. First loop, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22 air loops. Now we will count the 10th loop along the chain from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We insert the hook into the 10th loop, tie the connecting column. Now, based on this ringlet, we will knit a new square motif. To do this, it is necessary to tie 4 connecting columns along the air chain. We insert the hook into the first loop, grab the loop and pull it through the main loop, the first connecting column, the second connecting column, the third connecting column and the fourth connecting column. We throw knitting through the thread, perform 2 capes on the hook. In a ring we knit 4 columns with 2 capes. The first column with 2 capes, the second column with 2 capes, the third and fourth column with 2 capes, then we perform 4 air loops and connect the 2 corners together. We release the working loop, insert the hook under this arch, grab the loop, pull it out from under the Nisa, perform 4 air loops and return to knitting a new square. Let's tie 5 more columns with 2 capes in the middle. The first column, the second column, the third, fourth and fifth column with 2 capes, then we perform 8 air loops and once again we tie 5 columns with 2 capes. The first, second, third, fourth and fifth column with 2 capes. Now from this corner we will make the transition to the next new square motif. In the same way, we will tie a chain of 22 air loops, close it into a ring, and on the basis of this chain we will tie a new motif. A chain of 22 air loops was tied, 10 air loops were counted out and closed into a ring. Now, based on this ringlet, we will knit a new square motif. Having tied the necessary length of the canvas from these motifs, we will continue to knit the upper part of these squares. We perform 8 air loops: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then 2 capes on the hook. In the middle we will tie 5 columns with 2 capes, the first column, the second column, the third column, the fourth column and the fifth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 4 air loops in the middle of this arch. We will tie a connecting column. We wind up the hook, grab the loop and pull it through the main loop. Then we perform 4 air loops, 2 capes on the hook. On the next motif, we will tie 5 columns with 2 capes, the first column, the second column, the third column, the fourth column and the fifth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 4 air loops in the middle of the next arch. We will tie a connecting column. We tied up to the first square motif, and now from this place we will perform the transition to a new row of these motifs. For this transition, we dial 22 air loops in the same way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Now we will count the 10th loop along the air chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We insert the hook into the 10th loop, tie the connecting column, and now, on the basis of this ring, we will tie a new square motif. First, We perform 4 connecting columns, then we throw knitting through a thread, we perform 2 capes on a hook, we knit 4 columns with 2 capes into a ring. First we perform the first column, then the second column with 2 capes, the third column and the fourth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 4 air loops, release the working loop, insert the hook into the connection, stretch the working loop, perform 4 air loops, 2 capes on the hook, tie 5 columns with 2 capes into the ring, the first column, the second column, the third, the fourth and the fifth column with 2 capes. From this place, from this corner, we will make the transition to a new square motif. For this transition, in the same way, we dial a chain of 22 air loops, close this chain into a ring, counting 10 air loops. We take out the 4 connecting columns and knit a new square motif. We have tied 4 connecting columns, now we throw knitting through the thread, we perform 2 capes on the hook, we will tie 4 columns with 2 capes into a ring, the first column here is the second column with 2 capes, the third column with 2 capes and the fourth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 4 air loops and connect this corner. We will connect already in these 3 connected corners, we start the hook in the middle, we stretch the working loop, we perform 4 more air loops, then 2 capes on the hook. We continue to knit this motif, tying 5 more columns with 2 capes, then knitting continues in exactly the same sequence. A number of squares are tied, connecting the corners with each other. And then this row of squares is tied in the same way on the other side. Having tied the required number of rows of these square motifs, the end of this canvas is tied. As a result, tying row after row of square motifs, this is what the canvas turns out to be. They tied all the motifs, and then tied the end of this canvas in the same way. This ponytail is from the end of knitting. Here is such a very simple and beautiful openwork canvas turns out. This is how the front side looks like, this is how the wrong side looks like. I thank you for your attention. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much for the warm, pleasant words in the comments. Thank you so much for your support. Let's knit together.